Whispers in the ventilation. The Meyers had been looking for a suitable place to live for a long time, and when they were offered a spacious apartment in an old building at a bargain price, they didn't hesitate. The building had 5 floors, massive brick walls, and a high ceiling. The area seemed quiet, and you could hardly hear your neighbors. It seemed like an ideal place for a family with 2 children, 12-year-old Andrew and 8-year-old Sophie. The apartment was spacious, but obviously old. The wooden floor creaked, and the walls hid a long history. But Laura and Mark were happy. Finally, each of the children would have their own room, and they could forget about the cramped previous housing. The family settled in during the first week. Andrew chose a room with a large window, and Sophie got a smaller room, but with a convenient niche for toys. Sophie, although not delighted, quickly settled in. Only one thing worried her: the old ventilation grate opposite the bed. "Mom, can I cover it with something?" "Why?" Laura was surprised. "It's scary, and it's like there's a draft." Laura laughed. "It's just the old ventilation, baby. We'll buy a new grate if you want." But the purchase was put off. The first few days passed quietly. The children went to school, the parents were getting the apartment set up. But soon Sophie began to complain. "Someone whispers from the ventilation at night," she said one day at breakfast. "The neighbors, probably." Mark waved his hand. "The sound goes through the shafts. It seems like someone is nearby." But Andrew noticed that his sister was increasingly casting anxious glances at the ventilation. And then he heard the whisper himself. It happened late at night. He woke up, not knowing why, and suddenly caught a weak, barely audible voice. It was coming from the ventilation. It was impossible to make out the words, but it seemed like someone was calling. He crept up to the wall and listened, but as soon as he got closer, the sound disappeared. In the morning, he told his parents about it, but they waved him off. "Children, come on," Laura sighed. "This is an old house. The echo, the air in the mines, anyone can talk down there." But something told Andrew that it wasn't the neighbors. A few nights later, Andrew woke up again. The room was quiet, but he felt that something was wrong. He turned over and froze. Sophie was sitting on the bed. She didn't move, her eyes glued to the ventilation grill. "Sophie?" he whispered. The girl didn't answer. "What are you doing?" "He's talking to me," she said quietly. "Who?" Sophie slowly turned her head. Her eyes were empty, as if she wasn't quite sure where she was. "Uncle. He's calling me. Says I need to get inside." Andrew felt a cold chill wash over him. He jumped out of bed and tugged at his sister's hand. "Sophie, let's go to my parents." "But he's waiting." Her whisper was like an echo, but Andrew wasn't listening. He grabbed her hand and pulled her into his parents' bedroom. Laura and Mark woke up irritated, but when they saw their children's pale faces, they became alarmed. "What happened?" Laura asked. "There's someone in the vent," Andrew managed to squeeze out. Mark frowned. He went into his daughter's room, removed the grate, and peered inside with a flashlight. Empty. But Andrew would have sworn that he saw something dark in the depths for a moment. The next day, Mark decided to ask the concierge about the house. The elderly woman, Mrs. Pearson, did not want to tell anything at first, but then she spoke. "You are not the first to complain about the sounds. A few years ago, a family with a boy lived here. He disappeared." "Disappeared?" Mark asked. "Just disappeared. One morning they couldn't find him in bed. They searched everywhere. The apartment was locked from the inside. No one opened the windows. The only thing they found..." She hesitated. "What?" "There was a trace of his hand in the ventilation, as if he had climbed in there himself." Mark felt his fingers go cold. "Did they find him?" Never. After that, the family could not live here. They sold the apartment. Mark returned home in confusion. Laura and the children were waiting for him. "Well?" his wife asked. "We need to close the ventilation, immediately." They boarded up the ventilation with plywood. But at night it all happened again. Andrew woke up from the creaking. He saw Sophie sitting in front of the vent again. But how? They had closed it. He said I had made him angry for no reason, the girl whispered. Sophie, get away, he shouted. But at that moment he saw the plywood slowly move to the side. Someone was moving it from the inside. A hand appeared in the darkness of the vent, black, thin, with long fingers. It reached out to Sophie. Andrew rushed to his sister, but at that moment the room seemed to shake, and a piercing scream rang out. The parents burst into the room, Turney,